So welcome and thank you. I wanted to first acknowledge the territory that we are sitting on today, recognizing my home community, Musqueam, that is shared with our neighbors, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. I wanted to start out our press release in a good way to acknowledge the place that grounds me and grounds others in the work that I do. I also wanted to acknowledge the attendees that are here with us today, as well as the amazing staff at the Treaty Commission that enable us to do the work that we do, to put together the events that we need to put together, particularly the annual report and our press conference this morning. So the theme of our annual report for 2017 is the role of local and regional governments in advancing reconciliation from the perspective of the Treaty Commission. Reconciliation means a true sharing of prosperity, of land, resources, economic, social, cultural, and governmental space, which is shared sovereignty. Nowhere does this sharing of prosperity become a reality than at the local and regional levels. When a First Nation prospers, the entire region prospers. And as our history has shown, this isn't necessarily the case where Indigenous peoples have often been excluded to the regional growth when the communities around them have been growing. We often have said treaties are the highest expression of reconciliation. And quoting from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, treaties are a model for how Canadians, as diverse peoples, can live respectfully and peacefully together on the lands we now share. These are opportunities for reconciliation, for shared prosperity, and these are significant. So highlighting the significance of these opportunities is on our map on page 37. There's 14 negotiations in advanced stages involving 32 Indian Act bands, representing 1/3 of British Columbia's landmass. BC is leading the way in reconciliation. If we look at the map, it highlights there's 29 modern treaties across Canada. 8 are being implemented in British Columbia, representing 27.5% of the total in Canada. 7 of these treaties were negotiated in our unique Made in BC treaty negotiations process. We also find ourselves in a time where both the federal and provincial governments announced the renewed commitment to the recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights, the nation-to-nation relationship, and the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Treaties and treaty negotiations provide the ideal mechanism to advance these commitments. And the power that comes from local support cannot be underestimated. The success of moving the Tliama Treaty to completion after a long delay was due to the City of Powell River and Tliaman working together, working collaboratively, which demonstrates great leadership with a shared vision for their local region and their local economy. And nowhere does the rubber hit the road more on the really hard issues of reconciliation than in treaty negotiations. Reconciling local issues with First Nations, such as land ownership, recognition of Aboriginal title, intergovernmental cooperation, and the recognition of the new neighboring government are the realities of establishing a new and lasting relationship. The prosperity that will come from modern treaties cannot be a passive benefit to non-First Nations communities. It will not happen without active local and regional government support. And support from the business community and business leaders is an imperative to regional success as well. Treaties fairly negotiated and honorably implemented at all levels of government is reconciliation in action. This is shared prosperity and directly answers the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action to collaboratively advance reconciliation. Now I'll turn to some of the key highlights that modern treaties hold for reconciliation in a local and regional context. Like the potential that comes with all modern treaties is local infrastructure investment. Another result is the shared and collaborative governance model within regional districts. A shared future is exemplified in the ongoing relationships between treaty nations and local and regional districts, and the power of local investment to revitalize and transform local economies is also a direct result of treaties. We also highlight in the annual report additional government-to-government partnerships with those nations who are currently negotiating their treaties. This further supports the importance for regional reconciliation and how that regional reconciliation translates to shared prosperity. And my colleagues will share more about that shortly. What this also comes down to is building relationships, maintaining relationships, nation to nation or government to government relations built on self-determination is an important factor in reconciliation. But in order to get to this place, and drawing on the experiences of those we interviewed, has led the Treaty Commission to suggest some specific steps to reconciliation, enabling local governments and business leaders to help advance reconciliation and prosperity for all. Those are found on page 9, which includes supporting treaty negotiations. For those who committed to this path to reconciliation, we encourage all First Nations, British Columbians, and Canadians to get involved, to have a conversation, to support treaty negotiations, to advance reconciliation. And if you really want to get involved at the local level, please join the Treaty Commission and thousands of others on Sunday for the Walk for Reconciliation. So with that, I will turn to my colleagues, Heitzepka, starting with Jerry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Celeste, and good morning, everyone. The very first quote in this year's annual report, just inside the front cover, is from David Formosa, the current mayor of Powell River. And David says, and I quote, "Their own people, their own government, destiny in their own hands, all these resources. How can it not turn into huge prosperity for both of us?" The city of Powell River has been a model over the past 15 years in developing a relationship with the Clayaman First Nation. It began back in 2003 and over time developed into a model of respect and understanding. Key to this was the leadership shown by the past and current chiefs of the Clayaman First Nation, and also the past mayor, Stuart Alsgaard of Powell River. Stuart in particular was an enthusiastic supporter of the idea of coming together with Clayaman First Nation, working together, collaborating to try to proceed to treaty and beyond treaty. It's important to note that at one point, just a few years before the final treaty was arrived at, Clayaman was having great difficulty in seeing progress made in their treaty negotiations. And at the time, Mayor Alsgaard and some of his colleagues and the chief of the Clayaman First Nation and some of his colleagues traveled together to Ottawa to try to persuade the federal government of the day to proceed to complete treaty. And this was a outstanding example of the cooperation that took place between Clayaman and the city of Powell River. Today, with the treaty in place, with implementation taking place, the Clayaman First Nation has tremendous plans to develop the community in the interests of, yes, its own members, but also its neighbors. We point out in the annual report that Clayaman owns more undeveloped land than the city of Powell River. And it's currently looking at ways to utilize that land, once again, to benefit its own people, but also to benefit its neighbors. So this is a sterling example of how reconciliation, completion of treaties can result in prosperity for all. So thank you. Tom?
Thank you. That on? Talking about reconciling prosperity, and there's a section in your annual report called Revitalizing Bamfield. I'm going to talk to that a little bit. So as we march through the journey of negotiating our treaty, we realized that what we needed to do was to negotiate an economic development treaty, a treaty that would get us plugged into to reinvigorate our local economy, to plug into the BC economy, and eventually the international economy. We're now 6 years into implementation. We are now, as Slyaman, the major fee simple landowner in the Bamfield region. We just recently purchased 55 hectares of fee simple lands in the Bamfield Inlet. At the onset of treaty negotiations, our people said to us that we wanted to reestablish ourselves in the Bamfield Inlet itself. And so we've done that. We purchased the local store, we purchased the local restaurant, the pub, the motel, 2 fishing charter resorts. We purchased the gravel airport. We operate our forestry company, our campground, our gas pump, and numerous commercial fishing licenses. We're shareholders in the New Toronto Seafood Development Corporations, and that includes owning the St. Jean's Cannery and Smokehouse in Nanaimo. And when we talk about the regional governments, I'm very, very proud to report that our Huayet councillor, John Jack, is now the chair of the Alberni Regional Clackwood, or Alberni Clackwood Regional District. So that was a huge step for us. We thought that, and we look upon John as one of our new leaders that are going to lead us into the future. We also have been working with a company called Steelhead LNG. We're still trying to bring a facility to the Barkley Sound area, so we're still working on that. And we were able to get money to build a bike and walking path from our village in Anakla to the village of Bamfield. And the reason we wanted to do that was because several years ago, one of our members, it must be 10 years ago now, one of our members, we found hit and run on the gravel road. And so we've since then been trying to figure out how to make things safe for our people as they go between Bamfield and Anakla. So our treaty is producing these things that we need to have that we couldn't get access to before. I'll just end with a story. And everybody remembers when that huge windstorm blew down the trees in Stanley Park. We have a campground right on Pachina Beach, and it blew some trees down in the campground. And we wanted to move them from the campground to our playing field in the middle of the village, and I would estimate it was about 400 meters. Took us 7 months to get permission from INAC to move the trees. And then we had to get permission to sell the trees. And then the money that was earned from selling the trees went into our Ottawa Trust account, where we get to beg through proposals to access that money to the Minister of Indian Affairs. So no more. We don't do that anymore. We are self-governing. We are constitutionally protected self-government. We are moving forward with our people's desires. We are in such a different place than we were shackled to the Indian Act. And that's my message today as I can sit here and talk to you about real events that are taking place because of treaty. We would never be where we are today if we didn't have our Monmouth Treaty. Thank you.
Good morning, and welcome to everyone. My name is Francis Frank. I'm originally from the west coast of Vancouver Island, Tofino, British Columbia, and I want to thank our Chief Commissioner for her comments and also acknowledge Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. My nation is the Tlaoquid Nation, and we're located in prime geographic location on Vancouver Island. where 1.4 to 1.5 million visitors annually go to Tofino to see the beauty of Tofino. And Tofino has been the beneficiary of that because we're renowned for Clydewood Sound, War of the Woods, Mears Island, again, internationally known for the stand people took. And that all occurred because people came together. The local community, our municipality, saw that there was great opportunity to building a future with one another by trying to protect the resources. So there's great potential for my nation to continue that partnership with local and regional representatives so that we can help to prosper ourselves as a nation. And I think that right now the stars are aligned. The political stars seemingly are aligned for all of the parties, not just the nation, but for all of the parties. And that the opportunity is ripe for everyone to take advantage, to help one another to cross that proverbial finish line and move on to implementing modern day treaties. So I'm hoping that the stories that are shared by Tawasin and of my friend Tom's Bamfield revitalization, I know that there's great activity in Tofino, and my nation sees great wisdom in working with local municipalities, and the opportunity to work under John Jack and the regional district can just show that there's great potential for them to move forward in this modern context. Thank you.
So we have an opportunity to entertain a few questions. We'll also be available afterwards as well if you want to engage in a conversation that way as well. Yes. I don't think there's a slowdown in the process, and I think right now we find ourselves in an opportunity, a time of opportunity when we look at where the political alignment. And I think right now the rubber is going to hit the road where you see those communities that are in advanced stages moving quite quickly through to final agreement. And of course, those nations that are still building capacity and working through that might not necessarily be at advanced stages, we continue to support those nations to get to that place, ensuring that they also are fulfilling their vision to self-determination and being able to also, at their speeds, move through the process that they so choose. So right now, I think we are in we have a huge political opportunity to advance reconciliation through treaty negotiations. And what we'll continue to do is continue to push and support that process for those nations and the three parties to completion.
Do you see that, do you have a timeline in mind for getting some of these negotiations that are getting close? The 14 that you mentioned are in advanced stages of work. Do you have a timeline in mind of when you would like to see those done?
Well, I would think 2 years is an optimal opportunity for a lot of those that are really close. And I think they've also set, when I say they, the First Nations have also set some timelines of 2 years. And I think that is achievable for those that are in advanced stages of negotiations. And I'm sure, Tom probably has something to add. Thanks.
We're also in the process of starting a multi-year strategy where we're looking for sign-off from all three parties to that agreement in terms of how long they want to take to bring the treaty to completion. So there's a multi-year strategy that we brought forward to a couple of tables now. We're still kind of fine-tuning it, but we're expecting governments to sign off on these strategies which have the timelines.
Yeah, there's quite a bit explained in here in the interview that took place with the current Hagus, chief of the Clayaman First Nation, and the current mayor. And it was it was moderated by the former mayor. I think it really all began in 2003. There was an issue regarding an excavation that came upon some traditional burial territory of the Clayaman First Nation, and the city stopped and began consultation and began to build this relationship. It involved a lot of discussion, sitting down, getting to know each other. Prior to that, there was very little contact, you know. Clayaman was here, the city of Powell River was there. So that all began to change around that, and the relationship developed. The city of Powell River began to do some symbolic things. For instance, the flagpoles outside of the city hall, they raised the Clayaman flag. I mean, very symbolic, but important in sending a message to the entire community and to the Clayaman community that there was something different going to happen. And then, as I mentioned, at a crucial point in the negotiations where things were really bogged down, the Mayor Council joined with Clayaman leadership, went to Ottawa, and that sent a very strong message to all of the people in the area that they're going to work together. They saw the value of completing a treaty, the value in terms of social terms, economic terms, right across the board. So it was quite a story. It was very heartwarming rather, at the celebration when the treaty came into effect, when the former mayor, current mayor, all had an opportunity to speak to how they felt about it. It was very emotional outpouring, how committed they were to making this work. So moving forward, we have a section here talking about the future. There's great opportunity for the city and the Clayaman First Nation to collaborate, work together, and the groundwork has been done. The trust is there, the respect is there, and so we're optimistic.
Well, I think treaties are one of the mechanisms to actually truly get to that nation-to-nation relationship. And if we think about the constitutional entrenchment of self-determination, self-governance, and treaty and what that brings about, that really does espouse nation-to-nation relationship. And I think I look at relationships as evolving. And through the treaty negotiations process, the relationship between all three parties is meant to evolve. And I think that is achievable through the nation-to-nation relationship. That's really what's envisioned in a nation-to-nation relationship. And again, I think for those nations that have chosen the path to treaty, that is their way to express nation-to-nation relationship. Thank you.
I have another question about the political climate right now, since that has come up a few times. I'm wondering, is there a push right now to get these negotiations moving forward and get treaties signed, given that we have a Liberal government at the federal level and now an NDP government at the provincial level? Is that really sort of lighting the fire in terms of getting this going?
The answer is yes.
Absolutely.
From the federal government perspective, we see at a high level a real interest in addressing the whole question of reconciliation, and we see certain moves being made from the Prime Minister on down that indicate that federal government wants to see progress. And there are many ways to do progress. Here in BC, one of the ways would be to complete a large number of treaties. That high-level conversation has to get down to the grassroots level at the tables that we attend where the negotiations take place. It's beginning to happen. We're beginning to see it, and we're hopeful. Certainly in the provincial level, there's been a real sea change. All the signals we're getting in these early days from Victoria is they too want to see movement. They want to see progress, and we within the last couple of weeks met with the new minister, Minister Fraser, and had an excellent conversation, and they seem very focused on wanting to move forward with various tables and achieve treaties as well. So yes, there has been a change, and yes, we believe it's to the positive, and now we have to see it happen, locally, table negotiations, and in the communities.
Cheryl?
Good morning. Thanks, Celeste, for the reports. Thank you, commissioners. I'm good to see that, at least we're talking about the importance of relationships between First Nation people. Because at the end of the day, it's those people that are going to still be, at that place when the agreement becomes finalized with the implementation. Unfortunately, though, the situation isn't the same for a lot of First Nations. To the story, to your real life experience, Commissioner, having the chief negotiator stand over here and a little bit differently about what the issues are. In particular, those First Nations that are surrounded by municipal lands and don't have a lot of crown land to select from. And so what we've been hearing a lot of is that the concern is that local governments or regional districts have a veto when a First Nation wants to purchase land. And they've been coming across that situation. It's causing quite a lot of problems for them. And so I know that that's an issue that the state definitely needs to look at advancing and making changes to. What steps is the Treaty Commission doing to address that situation? Because it does affect a lot of First Nations communities. If you don't have that relationship, it's even more difficult. When I was chief of my community, I had a really good relationship with our mayor and our regional district. But just like all other elections, people change and different personalities come into play. And so in my community, we have no relationship with our mayor now. So it's a tough balancing act.
Thank you. So I think some of the work that the Treaty Commission is doing is not just the annual report, but I'll actually be at the UBCM next week, opening the First Nations plenary. I think that's an opportunity for us to at least deliver some messages on how to build relationships, lasting relationships, and respectful relationships between neighbors, because I think that's an important point as well. Another role that the Commission undertakes is, of course, sharing information, and we plan on doing that a little bit more robustly when it comes to local government this year, and being a resource for local government and regional municipalities as well, to utilize the Commission's annual report as a resource, as well as the 9 steps that we've laid out to assist communities and business leaders to take the first step to reconciliation and building that relationship. So we see a lot of work has been done in the annual report. We'll continue to utilize the work that we have undertaken, as well as continue to build our relationships with local government and continue to support the treaty negotiations process here in British Columbia. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add, in addition to our Chief Commissioner opening this plenary, we'll have a presence at the UBCM, what do they call it? Where various groups can set up booths and so on and so forth. And we'll be handing this out to every single municipal leader that happens our way. We are really going to try to promote this interest in local municipalities working with the First Nations within their area. And we know it's not easy and it's not perfect in all situations. We know and understand that. But we hope by utilizing this and the other methods Celeste refers to, we can convince municipalities to engage, in some cases reach out, in other cases respond to requests from First Nations to begin to meet and understand each other.
Thank you, Cheryl, for the question. I know part of our role will be is to share information at forums like the UBCM, but also we have an economic business summit that we will participate in Nanaimo, and so sharing with municipalities and local governments as well as regional districts, try to change the narrative from being what is it they're giving up to what is it they're gaining in partnerships with local communities and First Nations, and so that they can build that shared future.
So, thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
very
for the great
much.
questions and for attending today.